Hello everyone, welcome to CultureTalk, where we share insights and learnings from leaders in arts and culture. Today we're exploring what digital transformation means in the cultural sector, why that phrase is problematic, and examining how organisations can adopt a more strategic approach to technology in an era of rapid change. To guide us through this conversation, we're joined by Steve Plummer, founder of One Pebble Consulting. With a career in digital media stretching back to 1997, Steve has worked with numerous organisations to develop sustainable digital strategies that prioritise people and processes before platforms. Since founding One Pebble in 2019, Steve has championed a more measured approach to digital change, one he calls digital evolution rather than disruptive transformation. Hi Steve, thanks for joining us today. How's your week been?
It's been very good, Matt. Very busy, but we're on a Friday, so it's always a good day to end the week on.
Yeah, good to hear. Before we dive into the specifics of digital transformation, could you share a bit about your background and what led you to establish One Pebble Consulting?
For sure. So I've been working in digital, as you said, since 1997. Did my first website and Flash 1, which was, as I always say, a thing of beauty, but completely impractical and didn't really do much other than look lovely. I started kind of working in the digital strategy side of things about 8 years ago when I was working at After Digital. We created a digital strategy consultancy part of the business. And from there, I've pretty much been almost exclusively working in either creating digital strategies, roadmaps, and then sitting alongside those teams to deliver them, and or working on digital transformation training programs. So we have a 5-day masterclass, which basically gives you all of the tools that you need. But we also have a series of modules that are based on elements of that masterclass to come in to train specific skill sets. But the last 8 years has been fundamentally around digital change and digital strategy across organizations from 3 people to 15,000 people.
When I spoke to you the other day, you spoke about your work with Turning Point Scotland and other charities, and that there's a financial struggle within nonprofits in the UK at the moment due to the national insurance increase. For international listeners, national insurance is a form of tax in the UK, basically. To mitigate against this and other increases in operational costs, digital transformation is often proposed to organisations as a way to deliver services and products more efficiently. Now, personally for me, maybe I'm too much of a skeptic, but the concept of new technology delivering services better and cheaper leaves me with doubts. Is it realistic that cultural organisations can adopt the latest technology and employ better digital techniques, yet save money doing it?
So the answer to that is possibly, and usually is predicated with my favorite phrase, it depends. So you touched on Turning Point, and it's a really good example of having a digital strategy that's future focused as a bulwark against things that are going to change in the market as the market develops. So to take a step back, I did the initial digital strategy for Turning Point Scotland nearly 7 years ago, and it was a 5-year strategy with a 3-year breakpoint. And the purpose of that strategy was to begin the journey of reinvigorated their IT infrastructure, but also to align their staff and their culture with this idea of ongoing and pretty much constant change from an IT and technology point of view. So what that allowed us to do is to seed in the culture and the training, the thinking in the people, to then allow us to embrace new technologies as they happen with a lot more ease and a lot more approachability of adoption within the staffing, as an example. I famously said to the chief exec 7 years ago that I like to be held accountable for the roadmaps that I develop, to which his response was, great, come and join the board and you can sit on the digital steering group, and we will hold you accountable at board level every quarter to see whether that's functioning or not. I'm now chair of the board, so I'd like to think that's a fairly good indicator that my roadmap worked quite well. We're now at the point where that 5-year strategy, digital strategy, has run its course. We are about 18 months into the next one, which was kind of set a little bit off the rails because of COVID and the lockdown and all of that stuff, and having a lot of people having to work from home. But to get to the nub of your question, can we adopt technology and do so in a way that will allow us to drive efficiencies and help us with the very restricted financial circumstances we find ourselves in? And the answer is, in part, yes. It's particularly helped if you have a culture and a staff that are accustomed, I was going to say trained, but accustomed to the speed of change that technology brings. It's also helped because within Turning Point, we are very clear that digital needs to have a purpose, and that purpose is to free up the humanity within the organization to do what we do best, which is allow human beings to interact with human beings. So Turning Point is a care in the community charity. We work with some of the most vulnerable people in Scottish society. 15,000 service users a year go through our systems and through our services, and our systems are designed to take as much of the administrative burden and heavy lifting off those staff in order that they can be human and do the bit that we do best, which is to support our service users. Quick anecdote, and then we'll maybe move on. But when we were first drafting digital strategy, we did a number of workshops with those service users. And one of the fundamental questions that was asked at all of those workshops was, you're not going to replace humans with technology, are you? Because what makes Turning Point is the people we interact with. And the reality is, as we sat down and wrote that strategy, we could have done some of that. We could actually have replaced quite a lot of the human interaction with some form of technology interface. But just because you can do something doesn't mean to say that you should do something. And for me, one of the key questions that you need to be cognizant of when you're going through a digital strategy rewrite is the could-should conundrum. Just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do something. And if that should is going to get in the way of the humanity of the organization, then there are some pretty big questions need to be asked before you take the decision to do so. I don't know if that answered the question, but it maybe starts to unravel some complexity of what.
It did. And you mentioned people and humans a lot there. And I think that's going to be a recurring theme in this conversation, which we'll touch on a bit more later. But perhaps another aspect to touch on about the cost of technology is running outdated technology. I've spoken to a lot of organizations who are using very old ticketing systems. And I think we've spoken in the past about this, about the cost of maintaining those old systems, because either there isn't a team behind them anymore, and therefore you're running something that isn't particularly powerful and it's very expensive to do it. And that's often a way that where organizations can get something that's newer, better, and cheaper.
Yes, definitely. And I think so. There are a number of steps that we would take in the beginning of drafting that digital strategy. One of them is understanding the people, and as you say, we'll come back to that. But one of the key understandings that you need to have is what is the legacy licensing commitments of an organization, and when are the renewal dates for said legacy systems? Because I've seen it many a time where an organization is looking to revamp its digital strategy, but it's just signed a 3-year contract with a big software supplier that's locked them in for the next 3 years. And that fundamentally limits the options that you have available to you. But in some respects, those limitations can actually open up opportunities as well. And it's understanding when the license renewal falls will then start to dictate key milestones or key decision points that you have over the lifetime of a strategy. And I think for me, one of the things that I've seen many, many times is that organizations get hung up on, well, we can't do anything until we're able to get out of said, if it's a 3-year lock-in for a license renewal, for example, we can't do anything for the next 3 years until that happens. And then we can decide what we want to do. And the reality is not that. The reality is actually you can start to put in some of the building blocks. You can start to do some of the preparatory work, particularly around the people and even the process mapping in preparation for when that trigger happens. And a lot of new technologies are system and platform agnostic with great interoperability. That's a big word on a Friday. So you can start to put in new ways of working that set you up for the big change from maybe a core platform license renewal that you're not going to renew and you're going to upgrade to something else. So it shouldn't be a barrier to starting this work. But understanding that makeup, that landscape is really important when it comes to starting to write out the initial roadmap.
I'd like to explore this idea of digital evolution versus digital transformation. It's something that you've talked about a lot in the past. I'll admit I've used the phrase digital transformation many times, but on reflection, it has problems because it portrays this idea of a promised land where organizations can suddenly operate like well-oiled machinery. And it makes digital strategy seem like a one-off project, as if you go from A to B and that's the end of the journey. Is that kind of journey realistic for organizations? And why do you call it digital evolution instead?
It's a great question, Matt. So I have always had a fundamental problem with the badge that the industry and everybody else has decided to call this thing, which is digital transformation. And one of the reasons I love working with arts organizations in particular is they tend to understand the power of language, and particularly the power of words. And the challenge with the word transformation is that it sets up, in my opinion, and in my experience, an unreal expectation that you're going to reach the end of whatever it is that you're doing, and the organization is going to be transformed into something else, bigger, better, newer, different, whatever that may be. And the reality of the practical delivery of this kind of work is that you're never really going to reach that transformational state. It's an evolutionary process. What you do is you put in place a series of small incremental changes across different parts of the organization, multifaceted parts of the organization, which when combined as a whole, drive you towards an end goal, an end state that you want to arrive at a particular point in time. However, there's always a but. Technology moves at a very, very, very fast pace, and that incremental pace is increasing more and more as each day goes by. You just need to look at AI or blockchain or machine learning or supercomputers and all of this kind of good stuff. So the pace of change is getting faster and faster, and so the ability for you to arrive at that transformational state is never really a thing, but yet you're setting up your staff and your organization's expectation that at some point you're going to transform. So I much prefer to look at it as an evolutionary process that will gradually move us towards a place, a state of being, a new setup within the organization. But that end goal is probably going to change over time. And if you write a rigid digital strategy with a transformational end state, it sets up a mindset that precludes you from looking at a more evolutionary approach where you're constantly checking in to see whether your original destination is still the right destination with the right tools that you've put in place, because it's changing at such a fast pace. So yeah, evolution for me is the way to think about this. It comes with its own challenges, and we can maybe segue into a quick chat about that. But most of the challenges that sit around the phrase digital evolution are linguistic. They are based around how you talk about it and how you set that up within the culture of your organization, to make sure that people aren't afraid of that language. And actually, I think, having worked with a lot of organizations, people understand the evolutionary conversation much easier and find it less intimidating than telling somebody in 18 months' time your job's going to be transformed from where you are to where we want you to be. That's quite a scary proposition. If we say to somebody, your job's going to evolve over time from here to here, well, that's kind of what they've been doing anyway. There are very few jobs 5 years ago that look anything like what they do now, let alone what they're going to look like in 5 years' time. And so people can evolve gently into that new state much easier than transforming into it.
It's good to hear that people have responded well to kind of your way of explaining that, because some people might find that quite tiresome, the idea that they're constantly going to have to renew and refine their digital strategy, that it's a never ending process. I mean, organizations are perhaps used to this when it comes to things like accessibility. That isn't, they know it's not
Yeah.
a one-off project. How have, you said that people have responded quite well to that. How have you kind of explained that process to people who might find that a bit tiresome, who might be like, I just want to have a project done and to just like, I want to go to the promised land.
Lots to move on.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's a growing understanding that the pace of change in technology is such that that's a bit of a nirvana that never really existed, but certainly doesn't exist now, and that there is a growing understanding of that for sure. I think the way to manage your mindset is to set up the projects for success by having a clear understanding of a few things. The first one, and again, all of this is you sense check this on a regular basis to make sure that where you started is still, where you initially thought you were going to end up at the start is where you still want to end up. So you have to constantly sense check this. But if you're on a board of directors or a board of trustees or a senior management team, you should be constantly sense checking to make sure your direction of travel is still where you want to be going anyway. So this should just be part of your organizational DNA as such. But we always start any of our projects with an exercise which defines the purpose of digital in the organization. Because digital, again, we come back to language. Language is so important. The word digital has a number of different meanings depending on who you speak to. We will quite often do 3 or 4 workshops with a medium to large size organization, getting a lot of representation across all departments into the room. And one of the first things we'll ask them to do is get a post-it note and write their definition of digital on it. And invariably you'll have, if you've got 20 people in the workshop, you'll have 20 different definitions. So if you extend that out to 4 workshops, you'll have 80 different definitions. So if you then say to that group of people, we're going to do a digital transformation, their starting point individually is completely different. So one of the first things you've got to do as an organization is agree, what does digital mean? And then what is the purpose of digital for the organization? So, whether it was the National Theatre of Scotland, which is a relatively large organization, or Volcano Theatre Company in Toronto with 3 people, the first thing we did was sit them down and say, what is the purpose of digital for your organization? Now, why are we doing this? What's the measure by which we're going to decide, is digital being successful in delivering an outcome? What's its purpose? What's the why? I'm a big fan of Simon Sinek, and he always says, start with the why, then figure out the how, and then worry about the what. So that's very much the approach that we take. But if you start with a purpose, it allows you to constantly check back as you go down that journey, to check whether the purpose is still the same. And if the purpose is still the same, is the direction of travel that you're going in being supported to deliver that purpose, or actually has the landscape, has the environment changed considerably? That means you need to change direction in order to achieve the purpose of digital within your organization. And it's just a constant checking back. It's not constant every day. In a roadmap that we would draft, you'd be looking at 3 to 6 months as a typical check-in. 6 months from now, call a halt, check back and say, we started here, we think we're going there. Is that A, still the right direction? And B, have we still got the right toolkit to achieve that direction? Or actually, is there something else in the market that's happened, some new bit of kit that we could potentially bring in, or a new approach or a new way of thinking that allows us to get there faster or cheaper or in a better state with a higher state of quality? And so it's just a process, Matt, at the end of the day. But you've got to have a starting point. I love the analogy of a roadmap, this idea of you need to know, if you're going to get somewhere, you need to know where you're starting from and what your destination is. Now, that destination can change, but you still need to have that as you start.
Yeah. It's clear to see that you have a very kind of broad outlook, almost like a bird's eye view on what digital strategy looks like. And another one of your core philosophies you've explained to me before on digital strategy is what you call the 3 Ps approach. This is people, process, and platforms. And some people might be surprised to hear that you put people at the front of that philosophy when it might be intuitive to think that features and functionality is what matters to digital strategy. Could you explain more about the three Ps methodology and why people are central to digital strategy?
I mean, I remember when after digital, when I first posited this idea to the board, and they were, like you, quite surprised that I actually wanted to start the whole thing with conversations around people and culture. And the reality is any change program is going to be successful or not, dependent upon the people that are delivering it. In my opinion, it's relatively straightforward to understand the processes that wrap around an organization. And it's also relatively straightforward, once you understand what you're trying to achieve, to define what the platforms or technology stack. I use platforms because I like alliteration, and 3Ps is much better than PPT. You know, the technology, particularly now, maybe not so much 8 or 9 years ago, but certainly now, the technology is less of a problem because most technologies are interoperable and are fairly agnostic in that regard. And there's also new approaches to ways that you handle data, for example, using data warehousing, data lakes, whatever badge you want to put on that, so that you have a single source of truth with platforms hooking into it. So the technological landscape is much easier to work within now than ever before, and much quicker to work within than ever before. Process mapping is process mapping at the end of the day, and there are best practice sets of process maps out there that you can use to benchmark on. The people, however, are invariably the thing that is going to make success or failure more or less likely. And so we always start with the people. Always, it's always about the people. All of my successful projects for delivery have been successful because we've engaged with the staff, we've engaged with the customers, we've engaged with the stakeholders at every level, and got their buy-in, got their support, gone out on a listening program, and really understood their key concerns, their big ideas, and built those into the roadmap wherever possible and wherever practical. And once you've done that and you've got them on board and their support, it's much easier to then map that to the processes and then go and decide what technology you need to use. So to use the why, how, what, you know, the why is why, what's the people part of it? Why are the people going to engage in this? Why are they going to wrap their arms around it and support it? Then you look at the process. Well, that's the how. How are we actually going to deliver this? What process do we need to put in place to do so? And what processes do we need to support? And then you do the what, and the what is the technology. What are we going to use to actually deliver the roadmap over a period of time? So it is relatively straightforward. It's not rocket science. It's just common sense based on a lot of experience and expertise. I'm coming up to nearly 50 roadmaps now in the last 8-9 years. So I've done it a lot, and I've learned a lot from the mistakes. I've learned a lot from how things maybe haven't gone as well. And so hopefully that informs the advice and the kind of the project mapping of how we go about delivering this and trying to avoid the pitfalls wherever we can. So people first, always. They will make or break a plan, then the process, and then we'll worry about the technology. Technology is relatively straightforward. It's not easy, but it's relatively straightforward.
Yeah. You mentioned people being central to this because you ultimately need buy-in for them to go through this process of change. And you've mentioned before that there's a common challenge in organizations, what you call change weariness. When change is constant, how do you help cultural organizations overcome resistance to digital changes, especially when staff may have been through multiple technology shifts already?
Again, another great question. I think there are two aspects to this. The first aspect is where there's actually two. So this is where things start to get a little bit nuanced, because there's so many different scenarios, and no organization is the same. But there are scenarios that are similar. There are often organizations where change has been talked about but never actually started, let alone delivered. And so there is an undermining of trust there from the staff. Oh, here we go again. They're talking about doing this, but nothing ever happens. And here come the next batch of consultants to do the blah, 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 blah. And we'll get a nice fancy thing, but nothing will actually happen. So that's a change weariness from lack of change, when the audience, the staff really like it. Then you've got the next stage on where that's happened, but it's been really badly implemented. And so people see change as being something that actually never works, or hasn't worked recently well in the past, and therefore are quite cynical. And then you've got the third group where they have actually had change implemented. It's been pretty good, but they're on the third or the fourth round of it. And it's like more change. So there's three kind of elements to that, if you will. The first two actually are probably easier than the third one, insofar as we always look for the quick wins. So when you're doing the discovery, when you're working with the people on the ground and starting to build out what this roadmap could potentially look like, one of the key things that we look for as a team is, what are the quick wins? How do we build good news, positive stories, and momentum quickly, so that as the change program starts to be implemented, people on the ground, the guys at the coalface, the guys and girls at the coalface, can actually start to see positive impact on their workplace. I'm currently working on a project literally in the aerospace industry. And one of the key things that we need to find is some quick wins, because they have been through a lot of change in that organization very quickly, and they are a little bit jaded because some of the change has been quite painful. It's been quite an upheaval to some of their work practices. So I'm very keen to find the positive disruptions that are going to happen through this new program, get them in as much as we can at the front end, front load all of that, so that the first 3 to 6 months, the experience is one of positivity and actually making my life better. We always talk about the Whipham factor. What's in it for me? Well, what we want to do is make whatever is in it for you better. We want to make your life easier. We want to take some of the mundane, horrible tasks like admin and data processing off you if we can, to free you up to do some of the stuff that you really like. So front weight that. So they're relatively, if you can find them, and they always exist, and then front load them in, then those first two, where either change has been positive but never happened, or it's happened but it's been done badly, they're relatively easy to overcome. The harder one is where you have got a workforce that have had change programs, and they may be on the third or their fourth iteration of it, and they're constantly in this wheel of having to learn new stuff. And I mean, I could go on at some length about the academic research into change programs and the impact that it has on people, and the bell curves and the inverse bell curves that people go through in change programs. What I've found in that third instance is, if you actually sit people down and instead of imposing it upon them, actually talk them through those kind of conversations and explain to them that it is perfectly normal to have this reaction to a change program, that you'll start here, there'll be a dip where you start to, and there'll be a dip in emotion, there'll be a dip in energy, there'll be a dip in mental capability as you're starting to learn new work because it's harder than it was. And so you start to think, well, why am I doing this? It's actually making my life harder. And it's only when you come out the other end of that change process that you'll end up in a better place, more efficient, more effective, with better work, because all of the hard, or not the hard, all of the more mundane stuff's been taken off you. So if you explain that to them and show them the progress, they can actually then relate that to previous experiences, and they go, oh no, yeah, I went through that, I remember that, yeah, that was quite painful, but actually no, I am in a better place. So you remind them of the destination is much better, and reaffirm their needs to kind of go through this. That helps greatly. So we tend to do, on the third scenario, we tend to do quite a lot of training rather than workshopping, or workshopping and training. So that, and education is probably a better way of putting it, rather than training, more an education of the workforce, so that they understand that what they're going through and what they're feeling is perfectly normal and to be expected. And actually there's mitigations that can be put in place to support them. Long answer for the short question.
Nice.
And actually, the other thing that's really important, and again, one of the reasons I like working with the arts, is language is really important. So if you get the language right, if you get it consistent, and if you focus in on how you say what you say to your staff, and wrap in their engagement in that, and report the good news stories, then again, it's much easier. It's never easy, but it's much easier if you can engage them in that way.
I hope that other people feel the same way as me when they hear some of these stories, because as a marketer myself, I've been through a few painful digital transformation projects as well. And I find your thoughts and insights on digital strategy really enlightening and refreshing. And, I'm almost jealous that, I wish my previous projects went as well as that. But how do these projects look in practice? You've worked with organisations like National Theatre of Scotland and Volcano Theatre on cost-effective digital projects, but could you share some examples of how these collaborations delivered value without the high costs typically associated with digital consulting?
Yeah, I mean, where to start? Because that's another relatively big question. So my starting position has always been that, and I've said it a few times already, what we do is it's not rocket science. It's mainly common sense. And also, when you've done a lot of them, you bring a lot of experience and expertise into the room. But it doesn't take long to do. So, I've inherited roadmaps from big consultancy groups that have literally been a top and tail of a bog standard off the shelf digital transformation process. Like you once you've seen them, you look at it and go, I know exactly what that is. And all they've done is put in a fancy exec summary and a fancy conclusion. But the bulk of this is exactly the same as the other three that I've seen this year from that consultancy. And all they're doing is really just wrapping it up in a new wrapper and making it glossy and charging a lot of money, and probably taking a bit of time to do so. So I think the first thing and that's really frustrating, because it makes our job as a team much harder to get in the door, because there's a natural cynicism about bringing in a digital transformation team to come in and do all this work. It's going to cost an arm and a leg. It's going to take 12 months, 18 months, whatever. And then we're going to get something that's entirely impractical to deliver. Our approach is very different, and always has been pretty much from the get-go, since we started doing this. So to give you some idea, a typical calendar length of time for an engagement is around about 8 to 10 weeks, 12 weeks maximum. If it's taking any much more than that, it tends to be because the client isn't able to give us access to the people we need in that time frame. So it'll extend out. In terms of actual working days, billable days, it will go somewhere between 15 to 20 days per person on the team. So, if we need 3 people on the team, it will be 60 people days. If it's 1 person on the team, i.e. me, it will be 15 to 20 working days. And that's pretty much a rule of thumb that I can, if I look back over the 48 roadmaps that I've done, it's there or thereabouts. There's some variation, but it's there or thereabouts. So immediately you're bringing in an efficiency and an effectiveness to the process that the bigger consultancies aren't going to be able to deliver, or just won't deliver. I'll give you an example. So when I was working with Volcano, that was a 3-person theatre company in Toronto. It was a 2-man consulting team. So we virtually doubled the size of the team just with the consultants going in. We went on site. We worked with them for 5 days straight, Monday to Friday. On the Saturday morning before we flew out, we presented to them the first draft of their roadmap. Now, I'll caveat that by saying it's a 3-person theatre team. It wasn't particularly complicated from an IT infrastructure point of view, from a staff infrastructure point of view, etc. So it was a relatively straightforward project. Nevertheless, we went from blank sheet of paper to first draft of roadmap in 5.5 days. And then the final draft was presented to them about a week and a half after that, when they'd done some feedback with regards to practicalities of delivery and budget and all of that kind of good stuff. That was therefore relatively inexpensive and affordable for a small theatre company in Toronto to bring us in and do that. And then we worked alongside Meredith and the team for the first 6 months to support them on some of the knottier IT problems that they had, that we were recommending that they did. And they basically, they paid us a couple of days a month in retainer to allow us to do that. So that's one model for a fairly small organization. If you look at National Theatre Scotland, for example, just because of how dispersed they were as a team, that project took about 4 to 5 calendar months. But again, roughly the same amount of consulting days for Kat and I to come in and do the work that we needed to do. And then again, we worked alongside, this was after digital days, we worked alongside National Theatre Scotland because they were a client of ours, to then support and implement the strategy that we'd written over the next 12 months or so. Royal Academy of Dance is another great example, based down in London. We went on site, we worked with them for 4 or 5 days. We then spent 2 weeks drafting their strategy. And by the end of week 6, I think it was, they had an implementable digital roadmap. And then we worked alongside Mel and the team there for a period of time to help them with just the bedding in and kind of working out how that works. I guess what I'm driving is it doesn't need to be a big, huge team that's coming in. It doesn't need to take a year to draft this up. In actuality, if it's taking that long, you're not really getting something that's of the moment, you know, because it's too spread out and too disparate. And whoever's drafting it, you should be holding them accountable to the recommendations they're making, because those recommendations need to be practical. You know, there's no use having a big strategy if you can't actually implement it. So we are very outcome oriented. What's the actions? You know, if we start here, what do we achieve within the first 3 months? What do we achieve in the next 3 months? What do we achieve by the end of the first 12 months? And how is that going to have an incremental impact on the organization? So it should be very practical, hands-on. Why are we doing this? What's the outcome that we're going to be measured against?
And how would organizations and how would organizations translate? I mean that process sounds very lean and, you know, it sounds very affordable to organizations, but what about organizations who aren't working with an external consulting team? What advice would you give to an organization working with limited resources, embarking on a digital strategy project within their own team?
Yeah, great question. So for me, one of the biggest challenges that most clients have is actually freeing up the individuals to sit alongside the One Pebble team to get this done. The good news is that because we work relatively quickly and relatively efficiently, they're not going to be giving up a year of their time to do this. It will be 2 or 3 weeks, hopefully. The impact on the organization from an access to the staff point of view, which for me is critical. Like what we do is not about sitting alongside an exec team and then imposing a digital roadmap and strategy onto the workforce. The staff are critical part of that conversation. We need to hear from them. We need to interact with them. We need to understand their challenges, their day-to-day working practices, and how digital can best support that. Yeah. And then we need to wrap that and seam that into the recommendations and the roadmap that we're going to put in place, because that has 2 things. One, it shows that they will be proactively listened to, but also what we're going to recommend is actually effective. You know, we're not going to impose some new fantastic system that actually isn't going to help them at the grassroots level. What we want to know is what is it we're trying to achieve for you guys, and then we'll figure out what the system is that's going to help us do that, rather than the other way around. And I've seen it so many times where people have bought a fancy off-the-shelf system and not actually consulted the people that are going to use it, so that when they do get it, it's 10% effective against 90% effective, because nobody bothered to go and ask them what they actually need. Yeah. But to come back to your question about resourcing, for me, you need a fairly lean steering group on the digital process. So no more than 2 or 3 people realistically to sit alongside the One Pebble team. And their commitment time-wise is probably going to be a few hours a week initially from the planning point of view. There's a lot of logistical stuff to organize staff for things like discovery sessions, workshops, interviews, that kind of thing. We then go away and lock ourselves in a darkened room for a couple of weeks and kind of bring all of that information together, write out the first draft, and then it's a very iterative process with the steering group and potentially with the broader organization. So there is a time commitment, and it's important that that commitment is known and committed to if we're going to allow ourselves to deliver in the time frame we're talking about. But thereafter, it's very much about how you construct the delivery team, and that will depend upon size of the organization, the complexity of the roadmap that we're going to deliver. So For example, I'll give you 2 examples. At one end, using Volcano, it was a relatively simple roadmap. So although there was only 3 of them, it was relatively easy to assign, right, you're going to do this bit, you're going to do the IT bit, you're going to do the customer facing bit, because they're basically your job roles. And we'll sit alongside you and help and support. On a larger organization, the University of Buckingham, for example, where they had 1,500 staff and really complex systems and all of that kind of good stuff, there was 5 work streams. But what we agreed with the client was that there would be an individual that would head up each of those work streams. Those 5 people formed the steering group that we then worked alongside. And in doing so, we basically helped and supported them, but we had the helicopter view of the overarching strategy, if that makes sense. And it was a very similar system that we put in place for Turning Point, where we had a number of work streams across the organization. Each one of those was owned by a senior exec on the exec team, with a steering group comprising of the chief exec, myself as as the board member, and then those 5 or 6 people from the exec team who were actually running the work streams. And we met once a month and basically just sense checked how we were going against the roadmap and against the prospective outcomes. So you're right to ask the question. There is a time commitment, but it doesn't have to be onerous. And actually, it can be quite a lot of fun, particularly when you're starting to see the delivery and the positive outcomes. There's a lot of celebration should go on if it's being done right.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, if the goals are met, it's going to be worth it for the broader organisation once they get there anyway. So
yeah, absolutely. And it's important to state, within the roadmaps that we deliver, there'll be the overarching plan, there'll be the narrative that sits along that, there'll be a business case that says, we're spending X, but we expect to either make Y or save Z, or a bit of both. And these will be the outcomes that will be measured against. And so as a steering group, again, if it's being done right, the digital strategy will form part of the organizational strategy. And that will therefore be reported to the board, whether it's a board of directors or a board of trustees, and will be benchmarked against other parts of the organization. And the team will therefore be held accountable for that. So knowing and understanding that means that when we're writing the roadmap, we're writing it knowing that we are going to be held accountable, and knowing that, in 3 months' time, we could be hauled in front of the board and asked to justify why X hasn't happened or Y did happen.
Yeah.
Focuses your attention.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd like to move on to AI, because I feel like we can't have a conversation about this strategy without mentioning AI. Now, I'm personally quite conflicted about AI. It's super powerful. It does help me with my work almost on a daily basis, but I have serious problems with it from an ethical perspective and environmental perspective. And also because, from what I understand, all it's really doing is regurgitating information that's been fed, when we're doing enough regurgitating by ourselves as it is. What's your perspective on how culture organizations should approach AI and other emerging technologies?
So I come back to one of the first things we talked about, Matt, which is, what is the purpose of digital? And for me, that is a really important question that we need to ask at a high level. But then we can use that approach to particular types of technology as well. So my starting point with any technology stack, doesn't really matter what it is, but particularly around things like AI, or a couple of years ago, blockchain was the big thing that everybody wanted to understand how they could deploy it. And it's like, it has its uses, but if you're not in the space where it's useful, you don't need to worry about it. And I'm very much in that space with AI. I did a course a few weeks ago for the Mauritian Institute of Directors on AI, the organizational impact of AI at board level. So it was very much structured around kind of governance practicalities from a board point of view, all that kind of good stuff. But the reality with AI is, it is a tool, in the same way that your CMS is a tool, your CRM is a tool, your data warehouse is a tool. You need to define, first and foremost, what's its purpose? What is it we're actually trying to achieve? In my opinion, if you are asking the question, what can we use AI for? You're asking the wrong question. The question is, what is it we're trying to achieve to deliver a better service to our customer, to our staff, to our stakeholders, to a group of people, whoever they may be? Once you've understood that, Then the question is, can AI deliver that in a way that is better, faster, cheaper, more effective, more efficient? And or can it do that and also free up our staff to be more human? And so it's very much about approaching any new technology. AI just happens to be the latest, shiniest thing, very much magpie syndrome at the minute. You need to, it's the why. Why are we using it? What's its purpose? So that's my starting point. I also have a fundamental problem with AI because in the same way that digital transformation has problematic language, artificial intelligence has problematic language in it, because there is nothing intelligent about artificial intelligence. You are entirely right. I mean, it is changing, and so we do need to be careful, and I'll maybe come back to that, remind me. But currently, as things stand, the vast majority of AI is what I would term artificial median intelligence. It will give you the average. It will take whatever's out there in the world from a data set point of view, and it will give you the average of that data. So if you've got a task in your organization where you are looking to get the median position, if you are comfortable that what you are going to deliver is average, and actually that's okay, because there are tasks out there where getting it right on average is good, then AI might be the tool for you. But if you're looking for exceptional, if you're looking for inspirational, if you're looking for creativity, then AI is not the tool. It could, however, be the tool to remove some of the workload off the people that are going to deliver inspiration and creativity, to free them up to be inspiring and creative. So that it's about finding the lane that it sits in and understanding its purpose. Once you've done that, it then becomes relatively straightforward. So I touched on the fact that AI is changing, and it's changing at a rapid pace. Even 6 weeks ago, as I was about to give that course, I had to go and make sure that what I was about to tell people was still the case, because it is moving. And there's a new way of deploying AI called AI agents, which is basically building. So there are 9 different types of AI fundamentally, and I won't bore you with naming them all, but there are fundamentally 9 different types of AI. And what the clever people in technology are starting to do is to bolt various elements of these 9 together to create a decision path that allows you to intelligently, in inverted commas, map out a particular set of tasks rather than a single set of tasks, than a single task. So that starts to become interesting, particularly when you start to apply it to things like ticketing or marketing and communications, where you can get AI to join the dots to create a particular outcome for a consumer or a theatre goer, a ticket buyer. So it is becoming more intelligent, but you've still got the underlying issue of each of those component parts are still the median part of that AI. So all you're doing is combining various different ways of interoperating the median, not the exceptional. So it is a difficult one. But don't get hung up on the technology. Technology is the very last thing you should be looking at. You should be understanding the people. That's both staff, consumers, customers, theatre goers, whoever they are, people. Then your processes, and then worry about whether the technology is the right thing to deal with whatever it is you're trying to achieve.
And the thing
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it makes total sense, because the thing I like about that approach, because as you say, AI is moving incredibly fast. But when you focus on the people and the processes, it's technology agnostic. It doesn't matter what happens with technology; it's built for the future.
Exactly. And because, again, if you've written your roadmap correctly and you've got checkpoints and milestones that allows you to go back and say, we started here, we're aiming here, we're currently using this tool set. Is the tool set that we've chosen still fit for purpose and correct? Or is there something new on the market? And if you've developed your technology stack in a way that it allows you to be tech agnostic, it should be, in inverted commas, and it's a good job none of the developers I work with are in the room, it should be relatively easy to unplug a particular technology stack and plug in something new in its place. And certainly that capability is in the marketplace now. So again, this is where the detail starts to matter. You know, when you're starting to build out the technology roadmap that sits beneath the kind of digital change roadmap, if you will, for the people and the processes, that's where some sharp thinking needs to be brought to the table, because otherwise you're just going to build in roadblocks from a technology point of view. And there will still be some of them, but there are less of them now than there ever has been, because of the way technology is moving, and this ability to plug and play is really quite interesting. I mean, I remember back in 1997, you were making a decision on a particular technology platform, and you were kind of taking a punt that it would even still be around in 5 years' time, and that it would work with anything. Whereas now, if you build it right, you should be able to unplug and plug in something new relatively easy, particularly around core elements like data. So anyway, that's maybe a different conversation.
No, it's been fascinating to hear your approach. I love how lean and affordable the process feels, and I hope other people
It should be.
feel that too. But for cultural leaders listening who want to take a more strategic approach to their digital evolution, what would be your top pieces of advice to get started?
So for me, successful projects really have three things in common. One is that the inception of the project is led by somebody high up in the organization, normally an MD, a chief executive, an artistic director, somebody who has the ability to get things done and to sit at the point of first contact and make things happen. So having that person either as the lead or on board and supporting whoever is leading it on a day-to-day basis is really important. That's the first thing. Secondly, and anybody watching this is going to say, well, of course he would say that, but actually having a third-party objective viewpoint in the room with the experience of doing this multiple times is really important. Now, whether that's me or another, because there's plenty of us, digital transformation consultant, digital level consultant, having somebody like that in the room is going to help you avoid the pitfalls and avoid the common mistakes and bring a degree of authority, accountability, and confidence to the project, which is also really important. And the third thing is you absolutely have to engage with your staff. This is not a top-down imposition project. This is a bottom-up, top-down, meet in the middle, all agree where you're going, most importantly, why you're doing it, and then work on the how and the what. But always start with the why. Why? What's its purpose? Don't just do it for the sake of doing it. Figure out why you're doing it and how you're going to measure whether you're getting there or not. As the starting point would be my three recommendations. Top person, objective third party, get everybody involved and start with the why.
Yeah, no, it's a good final piece of advice to end on. And I think people have certainly caught a sense of the themes in this conversation, and why and people have been like the two that have stuck out to me. So those are definitely what I would end on to. But yeah, thank you, Steve. This has been a really illuminating chat. I really appreciate your practical insights on how cultural organizations can approach digital change in a way that's strategic, sustainable, and centered on people rather than technology. For those interested in learning more about sustainable digital evolution, not transformation, or getting in touch with Steve, you can visit onepebbleconsulting.com. I believe, Steve, you also collaborate with This Is Milk on digital transformation training, which might be of interest to organizations looking to develop their in-house digital capabilities. But yeah, other than that, thanks again for your time, Steve. I really hope we can explore more of these topics in the future, because I think as there always is in digital, the conversation is always changing. There's always new technology to talk about. So yeah, I'm sure we'll catch up again.
As you have gathered, I'm always happy to have a chat. Getting me to shut up can be half the problem.
No, it's great to listen to you. Yeah, I've really enjoyed it. But until then, enjoy the rest of your week, and goodbye.
Okay, cheers, Matt. Take care.
Bye.